Her name is Dana Whitlock. 19 years she gave to that company. She found out it was over from a calendar invite. The title said, Org Update, 15 Min. It came in at 4:02 on a Friday. Her badge stopped working before the meeting even ended. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She took a screenshot. That same afternoon, on a company-wide call, the new CEO told 412 people something in 14 words. Grant Ashford. He paced a lit stage and he said, "This is a business, not a family. Anyone in this company is easily replaced." Security started walking people out while he was still talking. They pulled a forklift lead named Marcus Deel off his machine mid-shift. His daughter's insurance lapsed by Monday. But here's the thing Grant Ashford didn't know. Before Halcyon, Donna spent 11 years as an employment paralegal. 3 weeks before that Friday, she'd sent one email nobody bothered to read. It was about a notice the law required and the 60 days that notice demanded. That Friday night, she opened the folder where she had saved every single version of it. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before we go on, do something for me. Subscribe so the little guy who reads the contract nobody else will always find his way back to you. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? I read every one. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, and let me tell it slow, because the details are the whole point. Halcyon Freight and Fulfillment sat on the edge of Fenwick, Ohio, a long, low building with a corrugated roof and a parking lot that flooded in spring. It moved boxes. That's all it ever really did. Boxes came in on trucks, got sorted, got shipped back out. 1,050 people made that happen. And for 19 years, Dana Whitlock was one of them. She didn't start in an office. She started on the floor. 23 years into her life, stacking pallets on the overnight shift, her hands cracking in the winter cold that came right through the loading doors. She learned the building from the concrete up. She learned which forklift pulled left. She learned the name of every man on the dock and the name of half their kids. She could have stayed there. A lot of people did. But Dana had a different kind of stubbornness in her. She signed up for paralegal classes at the community college 2 towns over, night classes. Tuesday and Thursday, after a full shift, still smelling like cardboard and diesel, she'd sit in the back row with her eyes half shut, and she'd force them open. Contracts, labor code, employment statute, the dry stuff, the stuff nobody else wanted to read. It took her 4 years to finish. And then she did something people found strange. She came back, not to some big law firm in the city, back to Halcyon, back to the building that raised her. She took a job as the compliance coordinator, which was a fancy way of saying she was the one person in that whole place who actually read the paperwork before anyone signed it. They used to tease her about it. Gently, the floor guys called her the fine print. She'd walk past the break room and someone would say, "Ask Dana, she reads the fine print," and everybody would laugh and she'd laugh too. Because it was true. And because it was the thing she was proudest of. Let me tell you what kind of person Dana was. The winter her husband Tom got sick, real sick, the kind of sick that meant months of treatments and drives to Columbus at dawn, Dana didn't take leave. She couldn't afford to. So she covered the overnight compliance shift herself. She'd sit up at Tom's bedside until he slept, then drive in at 11 at night and work till the sun came up, then drive home and start the day again. She did that for a whole season. Nobody made her. She just didn't want the floor to go a single night without someone watching the paperwork. That was the ledger she'd built. 19 years of it. And she thought, the way decent people do, that it counted for something. There was one habit of hers that mattered more than anyone knew. Every compliance email she ever sent or received, she saved. Filed it away in a folder on her drive, dated and labeled, neat as a card catalog. Somebody asked her once why she bothered. Most of it she'd never look at again. She shrugged and said, "Just a habit from the law office. You keep everything. You never know which piece of paper turns out to be the one that matters." She had a folder she had never once needed to open. 19 years, and not once. Keep that in your mind. Then, the board brought in Grant Ashford. You could tell the day he arrived that he was a different animal. He wore suits that cost more than the forklifts. He talked in numbers. EBITDA, runway, headcount efficiency, words that didn't smell like cardboard and diesel. The board had brought him in for one reason, though nobody said it out loud at first. They wanted to sell the company. And Ashford's job was to get the numbers pretty enough that somebody would buy it. Dana met him for the first time in a hallway. She put out her hand and introduced herself. Compliance coordinator. He shook it and looked past her shoulder the whole time, already on to the next thing. That was the whole meeting. She should have known then. The first real trouble was small. That's how it always starts. Small, Ashford scheduled the quarterly all-hands for a Friday afternoon. 4 o'clock. Now, if you've ever worked anywhere, you know what a Friday 4 o'clock meeting means. It means somebody wants the bad news to land when the building's already half empty and everybody's too tired to fight. Dana noticed the timing. She noticed everything. Then she got hold of the planning deck for what they were calling the reorganization, and she saw that her compliance review had been cut out of it entirely. There was a whole slide sequence about the layoff, headcount targets, cost savings, timeline, and nowhere, not one line, about the legal notice such a thing required. So she asked for a meeting. One-on-one. She was careful about it. She didn't go in swinging. She brought the numbers. Ashford gave her 10 minutes. He sat behind a desk that still had somebody else's coffee ring on it, because he hadn't been there long enough to leave his own. I want to flag something, Dana said. A layoff this size has a legal notice timeline attached to it. Federal statute. If we're cutting the numbers I'm seeing in that deck, we're over a threshold, and that triggers a 60-day notice requirement. We can't just do it in an afternoon. He didn't look up from his phone. This is HR theater, he said. It's not theater. It's the law. There's a headcount test, and if we cross it, Dana, he said her name like it was a small inconvenience. He finally looked at her. Let me tell you something so we don't have to do this again. I've done this at 4 companies. I know the process. And frankly, the people who slow the process down are the people I don't need. You're easily replaced. Everybody in a building like this is easily replaced. That's not cruelty. That's just math. There it was. He said it right to her face, weeks before he said it to the room. You're easily replaced. She'd remember the exact words. She always remembered the exact words. She didn't argue further. That wasn't her way. She said, "All right," and she stood up, and she went back to her office. And she did what she did best. She documented it. She sat down and she wrote the email, the one nobody would read. She made it clean and plain, the way you write when you know someday a stranger might read it aloud in a room that matters. She laid out the statute, the mass layoff notice law. She explained the 60 days. 60 days of notice, in writing, before you put people on the street. She laid out the headcount math, because the math was the whole game. The site had about 1,050 workers. The plan on the table cut 412 of them. 412 out of 1,050. That's 39%. And 39% was over the line. Way over. She attached the certified org chart that proved it. The official headcount. Stamped and dated, so there could be no argument about the number later. Then she did one more thing. She CC'd Sloan Merrick. Now you need to understand Sloan Merrick. She was the chief people officer. 47. Sharp. Always beautifully put together. And she had figured out a long time ago which way the wind blew in that building. The wind blew from Ashford's office. And Sloan had decided her loyalty belonged to whoever signed the biggest check. She wanted his approval. More than that, she wanted a piece of the deal when the company sold. There was a payout waiting for her if this all went smooth. She was not about to let a compliance coordinator gum up the works. Sloan wrote back within the hour. 4 words that Dana would keep like a pressed flower. Stay in your lane. And then a 5th sentence, worse than the 4. Legal signed off. Dana read that twice. Legal signed off. She knew that was a lie. She knew the actual lawyers hadn't touched this, because touching it was her job, and she'd have seen it. Nobody had run this past legal. Sloan had just typed the words to make Dana go away. Dana didn't reply with anger. She replied with nothing at all. She just took the whole thread, her email, the statute, the org chart. Sloan, stay in your lane. Sloan's legal signed off, and she dragged it into the folder. The folder she'd never needed. Dated, labeled, filed. And there it sat, quiet as a landmine. There was one detail Dana caught that night that she didn't fully understand yet. She noticed the layoff was timed strangely. It was set to happen and be final just 2 days before the 1st of April, April 1st. She sat with that for a minute. Why the rush? Why that exact date? Something about it itched at her. She didn't know it yet, but that date was the whole reason. That date was the motive. She just filed the itch away with everything else. Here's what Dana couldn't see, but you can. The reason for the hurry had a name. Kesterline Capital, a private equity firm. They were the buyer, and they wanted to close the acquisition on a clean set of first-quarter numbers, locked in by March 31st. That was the finish line. Ashford's whole bonus, his whole reputation, the entire deal, everything hinged on hitting a profit number by the end of March. And there was a cliff waiting. If certain severance and vesting obligations rolled over into April, the numbers got uglier and money got owed. So Ashford made a decision. He would do the layoff fast. No 60-day notice, no severance runway. Cut them, close the books, get the number, sell the company. Speed over process. Every single time. He gave the order. The terminations would be effective the day of the all-hands. That Friday. No warning to speak of, no notice, nothing the law asked for, just done. And that brings us to the room. I want you to see this the way the people in it saw it, because this is the moment the whole story turns on. It was a company-wide call. Everybody was supposed to be on it. The floor workers watched on a screen someone had wheeled out near the loading bay. The office people watched from their desks. 412 of them didn't know that their badges were, at that very moment, being switched off. Somebody in it had been given a list and a time, and while Ashford talked, the access was dying, department by department, quiet and invisible, like lights going out in a house at night. Marcus Deel was on his forklift when it started. He was the lead down on the dock, 34 years old. A single father. He had a daughter named Casey, and Casey had asthma, and Casey needed insulin. And both of those things needed the insurance that came with the job Marcus was very good at. He'd been at Halcyon 9 years. He glanced up at the screen when the call started, half listening, one hand still on the controls. Ashford came on. He didn't sit. He walked. He liked to walk when he talked. Back and forth across a stage they'd lit up for him, like he was worth watching. He thanked everyone for their hard work, in a voice that didn't mean it. And then he got to it. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said, "because I respect you too much to be anything else." Which is the thing people say right before they disrespect you completely. Halcyon is entering a new chapter, and a new chapter means hard choices. Effective today, we are reducing our workforce at this site. I know that's difficult to hear. You could feel the room go cold through the screen. But I need everyone to understand the reality of the world we operate in, Ashford went on. And then he said the 14 words. He said them slow, like they were wisdom. This is a business, not a family. Anyone in this company is easily replaced. And right then, that's when it happened in the room. Not later. Right then. 2 security guards in matching polo shirts walked out onto the dock floor. Everyone saw them. They walked straight to Marcus Deel's forklift. One of them tapped the side of it, the way you'd knock on a door. Marcus looked down at them. He looked up at the screen where Ashford was still talking. He looked back down. "Sir, we need you to power down and come with us." Marcus didn't move for a second. 9 years. He set the load down gentle, the way he always did, because even then, even in that moment, he wasn't going to drop a pallet. He climbed off, and 400 people watched a good man get walked toward the door while the CEO on the screen was still saying the word replaceable like it was a thing you could say about a person. His badge didn't work at the exit. Of course it didn't. They had to buzz him out. By Monday, Casey Deel had missed a refill, just like that. The coverage ended over the weekend. No runway, no bridge. A little girl's medicine, gone in a Friday afternoon, because a man in a good suit needed a number by the end of March. That was the peak of it. That was the moment the account was opened, in front of 412 witnesses. And an account like that has to be closed. It has to. The people who watched it will not forget, and neither will you. Now, most stories would have you believe Dana marched out of the building that day like a hero, fist in the air. That's not what happened. That's not who she was, and honestly, that's not how these things go. What happened is, she went home. She sat in her car in the flooded parking lot for a while first, watching the wipers she hadn't turned on, just needing a minute. Then she drove home. Tom, better now, healthy again, asked her how her day was, and she said, "They did it. They actually did it." And she went to the spare room, and she opened the folder. Because here's what she understood that Ashford didn't. Ashford thought the fight was over. He thought he'd won it in that room. He thought that by moving fast, he'd moved past the law. But Dana knew a secret about the law, and it was this. The law doesn't care how fast you move. It cares what you did. And what he did was skip a step, a required step. And she had it. She had the proof he'd skipped it. In his own people's words, dated and saved. The days after the layoff were ugly. I won't pretty them up. 412 people in a town like Fenwick, all out of work on the same afternoon. The diner got quiet. The line at the county assistant's office got long. Marcus took 2 part-time jobs that together didn't equal the one he'd lost, and neither of them carried insurance, and he started rationing Casey's medicine, stretching it. Doing the math no father should ever have to do. And Dana still had her job. That's an important thing to sit with. They hadn't cut her. Not yet. She was still inside the building, which meant she could see everything, and it also meant she was alone in a way that's hard to describe. She walked the same halls, past the same empty desks, past the taped-up boxes people never came back to collect. Word got to Ashford that Dana was asking questions. Somebody must have mentioned that the compliance woman wasn't letting it go. And in a leadership meeting, Ashford made a joke about her. He didn't know it would leak, but everything leaks in a building like that. He said, and it got back to the floor word for word, if she cared about compliance, she'd have a real job. That one traveled. The floor people heard it and it made them furious on her behalf. Because they remembered Dana on the overnight shift, Dana who knew their kids' names. But Dana herself, when she heard it, she didn't shout. She didn't storm anybody's office. Remember that about her. She never once lost her calm. She just went home that night and reopened the folder. And she added the date and the quote to a running document she'd started keeping. A record. She was building something. She just hadn't decided yet whether she'd have the nerve to use it. Because, and this is the honest part, the human part, Dana was scared. She had bills too. Tom's medical debt from that bad winter hadn't fully cleared. She was 51. Compliance jobs don't grow on trees in Fenwick, Ohio. Part of her, a big part, wanted to keep her head down, keep the paycheck. Let it go. Tell herself it wasn't her fight. That's the blind spot she carried. She trusted that documenting the truth was enough. that if she just kept a clean record, somehow the truth would take care of itself, and she wouldn't have to be the one to stand up in the cold and swing. And the company knew people like Dana. They counted on people like Dana staying quiet. So they made her an offer designed to seal it. Sloan Merrick called her in. All warmth this time. All smiles. She sat Dana down and slid a folder across the desk, a different kind of folder than the one that mattered. Dana, she said, you've been here a long time, 19 years. That means something to us, and I know this transition has been hard on everyone. So I want to offer you a graceful exit. Dana said nothing. She let Sloan keep going, which is a trick Dana had learned in law offices a long time ago. Silence makes the other person show you their whole hand. It's an enhanced package, Sloan said. Significantly enhanced. Well above what anyone else received. It reflects your years and your value here. She smiled. There are just a couple of standard conditions. There it was. The couple of standard conditions. The first was a non-disclosure agreement. Dana couldn't talk about the layoff, the process, any of it. Ever. The second was worse. To get the money, Dana would have to sign a statement. A statement saying that the layoff process had been, in her professional judgment as compliance coordinator, reviewed and compliant. Dana looked at that word on the page. Compliant. They were asking her to put her name, her paralegal-trained name, on a lie. They were offering to pay her a great deal of money to become the one witness who said it was all done right. To erase herself. Because that's what she was to them, whether they'd worked it out or not, she was the only person in that whole building who had kept the receipts. And this piece of paper was designed to buy those receipts and burn them. Sloan watched her read it. It's a good deal, Dana. It's the best deal anyone's going to see. Take a few days. Talk to your husband. She smiled again. But between us, I'd take it. This is the kind of thing you don't get twice. And here's the terrible thing. Dana almost did. I need you to know that, because it's true, and because it makes what she chose matter more. She took the folder home. She and Tom sat at the kitchen table, and they read it together under the light. And Tom, who loved her and who was tired and who'd been sick and who knew how thin the money was, Tom said, "It's a lot of money, Dane. It's a lot." And Dana said, "I know." And they sat there. She could see the whole easy road. Sign it. Take the money. Pay off the last of the debt. Retire early, maybe. Sit on a porch. Let Ashford have his deal. And let the 412 be somebody else's problem. Nobody would blame her. Nobody would even know. Nobody but her. She lay awake that night. And around 3 in the morning, the thing that kept coming back to her wasn't the statute. It wasn't the 60 days or the headcount math. It was Marcus Deel setting that pallet down gentle before they walked him out. A man being told he was nothing, and still doing his job right on the way to the door. And it was Casey, whose name Dana knew. Of course she knew it, because she knew all their kids' names, rationing her medicine in a town where a good job had just walked out the exit it couldn't badge through. And she thought about that word. Compliant. And she thought, if I sign that, then everything I ever said about reading the fine print was a lie. Then the fine print was just a nickname for a coward. She got up before dawn. She didn't wake Tom. She sat in the spare room and she opened the folder one more time. The real one. And she scrolled through 19 years of it. All those emails she'd never needed. And she landed on the thread. Her warning. The statute. The org chart. Stay in your lane. Legal signed off. All of it. Dated. Sitting there. Patient as ever. And she made her decision. It wasn't loud. Nothing about Dana was ever loud. She just closed the laptop, and she got dressed, and she called a number she'd looked up weeks ago and never dialed. The number belonged to Ruth Bow, 58 years old, an employment attorney out of a small office in the city. The kind who took the worker's side and had done it for 30 years and had the gray hair and the flat, unimpressed eyes to prove it. Dana had heard her name in her paralegal days, a name people said with respect and a little fear. Dana didn't take the deal. She didn't sign the ENDA. She didn't put her name on the word compliant. Instead, she put the folder on a thumb drive, and she got in her car, and she drove an hour and 10 minutes to Ruth Bau's office, and she walked in and set the drive on the desk. "My name is Dana Whitlock," she said. "I was the compliance coordinator at Halcyon Freight and Fulfillment. 19 years. 3 weeks before they laid off 412 people with no notice, I sent an email telling them the law required 60 days. They told me to stay in my lane. I saved everything." She slid the drive an inch closer. "I want to file a class claim, and I'll be the lead plaintiff." Ruth Bau looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up the drive and turned it over in her fingers like it was something rare. "You saved everything," she said. "Not a question. Almost a prayer." "Everything," Dana said. "I never needed it. I kept it anyway." Ruth Bau smiled then, a small, dangerous smile, the smile of a woman who had spent 30 years waiting for exactly this and rarely getting it. "Dana," she said, "do you have any idea what you're holding?" "I have an idea," Dana said. The first person Dana called after she left that office was Marcus Deel. She found him at the second of his 2 jobs, on a break, sitting on a curb with a phone he was behind on paying. She told him plain. She told him there was a law, and the company broke it, and that broken law had a price. And that price belonged to him and to everyone else who got walked out that Friday. 60 days. 60 days of the pay and the benefits they never gave notice of. For Casey, that meant the coverage. Retroactive, if it went the way it should. Marcus was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Is this real? Because I can't take another maybe, Dana. I've had enough maybes this month." "It's real," she said. "I have it in writing. I have their own words. I wouldn't have called you if I wasn't sure." He said yes. He was her first opt-in. The first of what would become many. They sat in that lawyer's intake room a few days later. The 3 of them, Dana and Marcus and Ruth Bau, going through the paperwork, line by line, and Marcus looking at the statute printed out on the table. The 60-day rule laid bare, said the thing that would end up carved into the whole case. "So let me get this straight," he said. "He told all of us we were easily replaced." He tapped the page. "But this notice, the 60 days, that wasn't, that he couldn't skip." And Dana looked at the page, and she looked at Marcus, and something settled in her chest that had been loose for weeks. "That's exactly right," she said. "We were easily replaced. The notice wasn't." Ruth Bau wrote it down. Now, what none of them knew yet, what Ashford didn't know, what Sloan didn't know, what even Ruth Bau didn't fully know as she filed those first papers, was that 1,000 miles away, in a glass office belonging to Kesterline Capital, a young lawyer was about to open a data room. Part of the due diligence for the acquisition. Routine, boring, a folder-by-folder review of everything Halcyon had done in the last year, to make sure the company they were buying was clean before they wrote the check. And there was one folder that lawyer was going to request, an HR folder. The one Sloan Merrick was certain no one would ever open. The one that should have contained a 60-day notice, filed with the town, signed and dated. It contained nothing. But that's the next part of the story. For now, hold on to this. On that Friday, Grant Ashford stood on a lit stage and told 412 people they were easily replaced, and he believed the fastest way through was to skip the one step that couldn't be skipped. He thought speed had saved him. He was about to find out that a quiet woman in Fenwick, Ohio, had saved every version of the email he never read, and that the corner he cut was about to become the shape of his whole undoing. Ruth Bau filed the claim on a Tuesday, and 2 days after that, a request landed in Halcyon's data room from Kesterline's own lawyers, asking for one specific folder by name. Sloan Merrick saw the request come through, and for the first time in a long time, she felt cold. Sloan Merrick read the request 3 times. One folder. By name. The HR notice file, the one that was supposed to hold a stamped, dated page proving the town had been told 60 days before 412 people lost their jobs. She opened it herself. Just to be sure. It was empty. A gray rectangle on a white screen, a folder with a name, and nothing inside it. She closed the laptop. She told herself it was fine. Diligence lawyers request 100 folders. They'd move on. They always moved on. They did not move on. But that part comes later. First, you have to understand what Dana was doing during those quiet weeks, while Halcyon believed the whole thing was closed and buried. She was working the phones. Not loudly. That wasn't Dana. She sat at the kitchen table in Fenwick with a legal pad and a cup of coffee gone cold, and she called people. Old coworkers. Names she'd known for 19 years. Half their kids' names, too. The union hall let her use the back room on Tuesday nights. There was a coffee urn that leaked, and a folding table, and a stack of chairs that never quite unfolded flat. And one by one, the laid-off came in from the cold to sign a piece of paper. Marcus was there every night. He'd become something more than her first opt-in by then. He was the reason people trusted the room. When a man they'd worked beside for years said, "Dana's got something real. Come listen," they came. They listened. And Ruth Bow explained it to them, the way she'd explain it to a jury someday. Plain, slow no, lawyer words. "The law is simple," Ruth said, standing in that leaky back room in a good coat. "When a company this size lays off this many people at once, it has to give 60 days notice. In writing. To you and to the town. That's the rule. It's not a suggestion. It's not paperwork you skip when you're in a hurry." A woman in the second row raised her hand. She'd run the returns desk for 11 years. "And they didn't." "They didn't," Ruth said, "which means the law says they owe you those 60 days. 60 days of pay, 60 days of benefits. Every one of you. As if they'd given the notice they were supposed to give. You could feel the room change. Slow, like heat coming into a cold house. 60 days of insurance," the woman said. She wasn't asking. She was doing math nobody had let her do out loud. 60 days of insurance, Ruth said. Backdated to the Friday they cut you. Marcus was standing near the coffee urn. He didn't say anything. But Dana saw his jaw work, and she knew he was thinking about Casey. About the inhaler. About the pharmacy counter and the number the screen had shown him on Monday when the coverage was already gone. That was the first cycle. Sign, explain, send home with hope, do it again the next night. There was a scare in the middle of it. A man walked into the union hall on the third Tuesday. A manager, one of the ones who'd stayed. Barrel-chested, clipboard energy. The kind of guy who used to walk the floor, writing people up. Dana's stomach dropped. She thought, spy. She thought, Sloan sent him to see who's here. He stood in the doorway and looked at the table of laid-off people signing their names. Then he took off his hat. They cut my whole shift too, he said. 3 weeks after they cut yours. Same trick, no notice. He walked to the table and picked up a pen. Where do I sign? Relief moved through the room like a breath let go. He wasn't a spy. He was one more name, one more claim, one more person the company had decided was easily replaced. By the end of that stretch, they had more than 300. 300 people who'd signed. 300 claims stacked behind Dana's, all of them saying the same thing. You skipped the step you couldn't skip. And here's the part the company never did. The math. Dana did it. She sat at her kitchen table, and she laid the pieces out like she used to lay out pallets on the floor, before the night classes, before the paralegal years, before any of it. 1,050 people worked at the Fenwick site. 412 got cut in a single stroke. That's 39%. And 39% all at once at a site that size that clears the line the law draws. Not by a hair, by a mile. She had the org chart to prove it. Certified, stamped and dated. She'd attached it to the warning email nobody read. 3 weeks before that Friday, it sat in her folder now, patient as a photograph. And she had the dates. That was the second thing. The thing that mattered even more than the head count. Because a company caught skipping the notice has one door left to crawl through. They can say it was sudden, unforeseeable, a business emergency nobody saw coming, the kind the law forgives. Dana's emails closed that door before anyone could reach for the handle. Because her emails were dated. March, weeks of them. Planning documents. Headcount projections. The layoff mapped out in careful spreadsheets long before the day it happened. You don't plan a thing for a month and then call it a surprise. The paper wouldn't let you. They planned it in March, Dana told Ruth, sliding the printouts across the diner booth where they met when the union hall was booked. 2 coffees, a plate of fries nobody touched. Look at the dates. They knew in March. They cut in April. That's not sudden. That's scheduled. Ruth read them slowly. She was 58, and she'd seen a lot of folders. Dana watched her face and saw the thing she'd been hoping to see. Ruth's eyebrows lifted, just slightly. "This is clean," Ruth said. "This is the cleanest documentation I've had in a class case in years." She looked up. "You know why they don't have this on their side? Because nobody's supposed to keep it. Companies delete. People forget. And I archive every compliance email," Dana said. "Habit from the law office. I never once needed the folder." She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn on the table. Until now. While Dana built her stack of 300 names 1,000 miles away in a glass office, a young lawyer at Kesterline Capital kept working through the data room. Folder by folder. Routine, the acquisition was close. The check was nearly written. All that was left was to make sure the company Kesterline was buying was as clean as Halcyon's people said it was. The young lawyer had requested one HR folder by name. It came back empty. He requested it again, thinking it was a glitch. Empty again. So he did what diligence lawyers do. He asked why. He sent a note up the chain. Just a question, in careful lawyer language. "Where is the 60-day mass layoff notice for the Fenwick site reduction? Regulations require it be filed. The file is empty. Please advise." The note landed on a partner's desk at Kesterline. The partner read it twice. Then he made a call, and the call went out to Halcyon, and it climbed until it reached the room where Grant Ashford sat. Ashford took the call like he took every call. Fast, impatient, certain he was the smartest person on the line. "It's a paperwork thing," he said. "Our HR handled the layoff. It's done. It's clean." "Then where's the notice?" the Kesterline partner asked. There was a pause, the kind of pause that costs money. "I'll check," Ashford said. He checked, which meant he called Sloan Merrick into his office and shut the door. And for the first time she saw something on his face she'd never seen before. Not contempt. Fear. "Where's the notice, Sloan?" She'd built her whole career on being loyal to power, on believing that standing next to the strongest person in the room was safer than standing next to the paper. She opened her mouth to say it was handled. She'd said it 100 times. It was handled, it was covered, don't worry about it. But the folder was empty, and they both knew it. "There's a claim," she said instead. Quietly, A-class claim. "It was filed a few weeks ago. Lead plaintiff is..." She stopped. "It's Dana Whitlock." Ashford didn't know the name. That was the thing. He'd stood on a stage and told 412 people they were easily replaced, and he couldn't have picked the one who'd undo him out of a lineup. "Who?" "Compliance," she sent an email. "Before the layoff. About the notice." Sloan's voice had gone flat. "I told her to stay in her lane." "You told her," Ashford stood up. "There's an email? She has an email?" "She has everything," Sloan said. And there it was. The truth she'd been running from since the folder came back gray. She kept everything. Now Kesterline's counsel put the number on the table. On a conference call. And Grant Ashford was on that call. They walked it through the way lawyers do. slow and merciless. 412 workers. 60 days of back pay and benefits owed to each one, because the notice was skipped. Run the arithmetic and it lands somewhere near $9.7 million. Then add the civil penalty for failing to tell the town, a fee for every day the notice was late. Then add the thing that mattered most to the people on that call. Deal risk. A live class action liability sitting inside the company they were about to buy. The room where Ashford sat had a long table and good chairs and a view, and it was full of the same kind of power he'd always answered to. The board, the buyers, the people whose numbers he'd been installed to fatten. They looked at him the way he'd looked at 412 people from a lit stage. "You told us this was clean," the Kesterline partner said. "It was a routine reduction," Ashford said. "Every company does layoffs, not without the notice." A pause. "You skipped the notice." And Grant Ashford, the man who was certain speed beats process, sat in a glass room and finally did the math he'd refused to do in March. $9.7 million. Because he wouldn't wait 60 days. The corner he cut had a number on it now. And every person in that room could see it. The company did not go quietly. They never do. Halcyon's outside law firm, expensive suits, a whole floor in a city tower, went looking for the one door left. The exception. The law forgives a skipped notice if the circumstances were truly unforeseeable. A sudden collapse, a disaster no reasonable person could have planned around. So that's the story they started to build. It wasn't planned. It was a business emergency. The market turned, the buyer pushed, we had no choice. It happened fast. And they came for Dana. Ruth called her the night the pressure started. "They're going to lean on you," Ruth said. "Hard. I want you ready." They leaned. A letter came first. Cold, formal, it reminded Dana that in her paralegal years she'd signed confidentiality agreements. It suggested, never quite said, but suggested, that her old obligations might be twisted into a muzzle. It hinted at a counterclaim. And then, in the last paragraph, the velvet, a private settlement, a large one, just for her. Drop the class, sign the paper, walk away richer than she'd ever been. Erase the one witness who kept receipts. They were still trying, even now. Dana read the letter at her kitchen table. Tom sat across from her. He'd been sick that winter, the winter she'd covered the overnight shift, and he was well now, and he watched her face over the top of his reading glasses. "They're scared of you," he said. "They're scared of the folder," Dana said. "I'm just the one who kept it." The harder blow landed on Marcus. Casey's meds were a running number in his life, an ache that never fully went away. And when word got around that the company might drag this out for a year, might fight it clause by clause, Marcus wobbled. He came to the diner booth, and he couldn't quite look at Dana. "They're saying it could take a year," he said. "Maybe more." And Casey, he rubbed his face with both hands. "There's a settlement, Dana. My name's on the class. If a bunch of us take the private thing, quiet, we could have money by spring. I can't tell my kid to wait a year for an inhaler." Dana didn't shout. She never shouted. That wasn't the shape of her. She reached across the table and put her hand flat on the printouts. The March emails. The dates. "Marcus," she said, "look at me. If you take the quiet money, you get a check and a gag order, and you go home. And so do the other 300, one by one, until there's nobody left standing and the company writes it off as the cost of doing business. And the next time a man like Ashford wants to cut a corner, he'll know it's cheap. He'll know he can buy the quiet ones out." Marcus looked at her. "I was on that floor before I read a single contract," Dana said. "I stacked pallets. I know what 60 days of insurance is worth to a family. I'm not asking you to be brave. I'm asking you to hold on a little longer than they think you can. Because they're betting you can't." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, the way he nodded on the floor when a load came in right. "How long?" he said. Not as long as they want you to think, Dana said. Because here's what the company's expensive suits didn't know when they reached for the unforeseeable circumstances door. Dana had already nailed it shut. In March, Ruth walked into it in a windowless conference room, across a table from 3 lawyers who'd billed more that morning than Marcus made in a month. They laid out their defense. Sudden, unforeseeable, no time for notice. Ruth didn't argue. She opened a folder. "You're going to say it was unforeseeable," she said. She set down a page. "This is a planning document. Dated March 2nd. It projects the exact headcount you cut. 412. She set down another. March 9th. A revised spreadsheet. Same reduction. Mapped by department. Another, March 16th. The suit stopped moving. "You planned this for a month," Ruth said, laying pages down one at a time. "Like cards. You don't plan a thing for a month and then call it a surprise. The law won't let you, and neither will the calendar." Then she set down the last one. And this was the one that took the air out of the room. "And this," Ruth said, "is an email. From your own compliance coordinator, dated 3 weeks before the layoff. It names the statute. It names the 60-day requirement. It attaches a certified org chart proving you were over the threshold. It went to your chief people officer." She turned the page so they could read it right side up. And here's her reply. 4 words. "Stay in your lane." Legal signed off. Ruth looked up. Legal did not sign off. "There's no legal sign-off in your files." I checked. "There's an empty folder where it should be." Silence. "Your own people saw it coming," Ruth said quietly. "In writing. You can't call a thing unforeseeable when your compliance department foresaw it and put it in an email." The door they'd reached for wasn't there. Dana had closed it in March, weeks before she knew she'd need to. The folder she'd never once needed had just saved 412 people. The reckoning came in a glass room. Halcyon's own conference room. The big one. Walls of glass looking out over the floor Dana used to work. A call was up on the screen. Kesterline's partners, patched in from their tower 1,000 miles away. Ashford was there. Sloan was there, sitting very still. And on Dana's side of the table, Ruth Bow and Dana herself, in the plain good coat she wore to serious things. Ruth read the certified numbers into the room. The head count. The threshold. The days owed. The dollar figure the company had refused to look at in March and could not look away from now. Then, Dana did the only theatrical thing she did in the whole story. She reached into her bag and took out one printed page and set it flat on the table, where the glass caught the light. Merrick's email. "Stay in your lane." Beside it, printed small underneath, the text of the statute it broke. Ashford saw it, and he reached, one last time, for the thing that had always worked for him. "Contempt. This is theater," he said. "This is a disgruntled employee with a grievance and a printout. This is exactly the kind of HR noise you told 400 people they were easily replaced," Dana said. The room went quiet. She hadn't raised her voice. She never did. But the quiet leaned toward her. "You said it on a stage, to their faces, while security walked them out of the building. 412 people. Easily replaced." She looked at him, steady, tired, done. The one thing that wasn't replaceable was the 60 days notice you skipped. You could replace all of us. You couldn't replace the law. Nobody spoke. On the screen, one of Kesterline's partners had leaned back out of frame. Ashford opened his mouth. Nothing came. The line she'd said in the intake room weeks before, quiet across a lawyer's desk. "We were easily replaced." The notice wasn't. Landed here. In the glass room. In front of the same kind of power that had sat and watched him call them nothing. And it landed like a door closing. Then each of them fell. Not all at once. One at a time, the way they'd cut people. Grant Ashford went first, and it was his own metric that ended him. Kesterline looked at $9.7 million in liability and a public class claim wrapped around the company they were buying, and they did what men like that always do. they protected the deal. They repriced it down for the damage, and they told the board that leadership had to change before they'd sign. The board looked at the number, and the claim and the name Ashford in every headline that was about to run. And they forced his resignation. To protect the transaction. That was the phrase in the release. To protect the transaction. The man who'd moved the all-hands to Friday at 4 to save 2 days had cost the company millions and cost himself the chair. His speed, the thing he was proudest of, was the thing that ended him. Somewhere a stage went dark and stayed dark, and this time, it was his. Sloane Merrick fell next, and she fell on 4 words she'd typed without thinking, because the lawyers needed a name. Someone the company had warned who ignored it, someone to hang the foreseeability on. And there was only one email in the whole company that named the statute before the layoff, and only one reply that waved it away. Stay in your lane. Legal signed off. Her name was on it. Her signature block. Her fingerprints. They walked her out on a Friday. Quiet, no announcement. A box and a badge left at the desk. The exact way she'd walked 412 people out. The way she'd helped design. She told them, on her way through the door, the only defense she had left. I was told to. Ashford told me to move fast. I was following orders. But she'd typed the reply herself. Stay in your lane. She'd chosen loyalty to the man over the paper on the desk. And the paper was still here. And the man was already gone. Her own words were her sentence. She'd been so sure that standing next to power was safer than standing next to the truth. The board and Kesterline weren't villains, exactly. They were the chorus. The system doing what it does when the paper is unarguable. They settled the class. They paid the town penalty. There was no gloating in it, no drama. Just lawful authority looking at documentation that couldn't be denied and writing the checks it required. That was the resolution. Not violence. Not revenge even. Just the 60 days. Owed and finally paid. And then, the strangest beat of all. Grant Ashford called Dana. She was at her kitchen table when the phone rang, a Tuesday morning light on the Formica. She didn't recognize the number. She almost didn't answer. He was angling for a soft landing. She could hear it in the first 3 words. The bluster was gone, sanded down to something almost polite. He wanted her to sign a statement. Just a small thing, he said, that the company had acted in good faith. It would help him. It would help everyone move on, he said. Put it behind us. The man who'd said 400 people were easily replaced was calling the quietest one to ask her for a favor. Dana let the pause sit. She'd learned that from him, maybe. The pause that cost something. She let it stretch. Then she named the price. Gentle and final. Reinstate insurance, she said. Retroactive to that Friday. For all 412. Every person you cut. Backdated to the day their coverage ended. A breath. Do that, and then we'll talk about good faith. He couldn't. Of course he couldn't. He was already gone. No chair, no signing authority, no company. The favor was all he had left to ask for, and nothing left to give. The line went dead on his end. She set the phone down. She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn on the table. And she went back to her morning. The settlement cleared that spring. 60 days of back pay restored to every worker. Benefits reinstated, backdated to the Friday they'd been cut, the way Dana had demanded when she still had nothing to demand it with. 412 people made whole, or as whole as money makes anyone after a thing like that. And Marcus Deel stood at a pharmacy counter with his daughter's coverage backdated on the screen. Active again. Real again. The pharmacist slid the little white bag across the counter. Casey's inhaler. Her refill. The thing that had lapsed by Monday all those weeks ago when a man on a stage decided 60 days was too long to wait. Marcus put the inhaler in his jacket pocket. He put his hand flat over it. Once, the way you check that something precious is still there. Then he took his daughter's hand, and they walked out into the parking lot. And the coverage held, and it kept holding. 8 months later, there was a small storefront on the main street in Fenwick, Ohio. It had a frosted glass door. And on the glass, in clean gold letters, it read Whitlock Workplace Compliance. Morning light came through the frost and lay in a soft bar across the floor inside. Dana had the key. She'd unlock the door a little before 9, most mornings, and stand for a second in the quiet before the day started. She consulted now. For small companies, for the kind of floor she'd come from, the pallets and the overnight shifts, and the people who knew every coworker's kids' names. She read the contracts nobody else would read. She made sure the notice got filed. She was, at last, exactly the thing she'd always been, with a door that finally had her name on it. Marcus was back on a forklift at a warehouse across town, a company that had rehired half the old Fenwick crew. Casey's inhaler rode in his jacket pocket. Always, a small habit now. A thing he checked without thinking. He'd wave at Dana through the frosted glass when he drove past on the early shift. As for the others, Grant Ashford surfaced a while later at a smaller firm, a few states over. The title had the word restructuring in it. He was quieter now, they said. The stages he stood on were smaller, and the lights weren't as bright, and nobody handed him a company to fatten for a sale. Sloan Merrick's page online said she was exploring opportunities. It had said that for a while. And the folder, the one Dana had kept for 19 years and never once needed, the habit from the law office, the archive of every compliance email nobody read, sat backed up on a drive in the little storefront with the frosted glass door. She didn't think about it much anymore. She didn't have to, because the fine print had always belonged to the people who bothered to read it, the quiet ones, the ones who take the screenshot instead of arguing, the ones who save every version of the email, just in case, just a habit, until the morning it turns out to be the only thing standing between 412 people and the word replaceable. That was the whole story. A man cut the one corner that couldn't be cut, and a quiet woman in Fenwick, Ohio, had kept the proof. If a company ever told you that you were easily replaceable, tell me where you're watching from. Comment your city, and let's see how many of us read the fine print. The conference room on the 14th floor had glass on 3 sides. You could see the loading dock from up there, the freight doors, the empty parking rows where 412 cars used to be. Dana had never been in that room before. Nobody from compliance had. Ruth Bow set her briefcase on the table without ceremony and opened it. She was not loud. She didn't need to be. She had 47 exhibits, Bates stamped, in sequence. And she had Dana's folder on a thumb drive and printed in triplicate. Kesterline Capital's outside counsel, 3 of them, from a firm with offices in 4 cities, sat on one side. The board members were on a screen. Grant Ashford sat at the head of the table, like a man who had not yet understood what was happening to him. Ruth began with the statute. She read the threshold numbers into the record. She laid the certified headcount on the table. 1,047 employees at the Fenwick site. 412 terminated in a single action. 39%. 2 points above the floor, the law required for notice. She named the date the planning emails were first drafted, March 3rd. She named the date the terminations executed, March 29th. She did not editorialize. The numbers did it for her. Dana set 1 page on the table herself. She did it quietly, with both hands, the way you'd set down something fragile. It was a printout of Sloan Merrick's reply, "Stay in your lane." Legal signed off, sitting beside the statute it violated. 1 page. No speech required. Ashford said, "This is theater." Dana looked at him for a moment. Through the glass behind him, the loading dock sat empty, the freight bays dark, the parking lot a plain of unbroken concrete. She said, calm and final, "You told 400 people they were easily replaced. The one thing that wasn't replaceable was the 60 days notice you skipped." Nobody spoke. The Kesterline lawyers exchanged a look that lasted less than a second, but carried a full conversation inside it. The meeting went another 2 hours. Dana and Ruth were gone before it ended. The deal did not collapse. That was the part nobody had predicted. Kesterline moved forward, but they repriced. $9.7 million in liability had to come from somewhere, and they found it carved out of the acquisition premium Ashford had staked his quarter on. The margin he had chased, the cost he had cut to reach it, he had cut it himself, without knowing, the day he skipped the notice. His own arithmetic had done the work. The board made the call on a Wednesday. Leadership transition. Effective immediately. The language was careful, the way language always is, when it is keeping something quiet that is not quiet. He was out. There was no severance trigger. The vesting cliff was April 1st, and the board had moved fast enough to beat it, the same way he had tried to beat the notice window. He would have understood exactly what they had done. He was a man who understood timing. Sloan Merrick's exit came a week later. Her reply, legal signed off, was Exhibit 31. An outside counsel needed a named individual to carry the foreseeability argument, so the unforeseeable circumstances defense couldn't attach to the company's liability. She was walked out on a Friday afternoon. Quiet, her badge access ended before she cleared the lobby. She had designed that process herself, once for other people. The car the company paid to take her home may have been a small mercy, or may have been the cruelest detail of all, depending on how you looked at it. The call came from an area code Dana didn't recognize. Mid-Atlantic, somewhere. She picked up because she always picked up numbers she didn't know. Occupational habit by now. He didn't identify himself. She knew his voice in 3 words. He wanted a letter, he said, something brief. A signed statement that the company had acted in good faith. His lawyers needed it for a clean exit. It would help. Dana let the silence sit a moment. Through the window in front of her, a streetlight had just clicked on above a rusted newspaper box and a parking meter with 2 minutes left on it. Then she said, reinstate insurance, retroactive to that Friday. For all 412. Then we'll talk about good faith. A pause on his end. Not a long one. The line went dead. He didn't call back. The settlement cleared on a Tuesday in November. 60 days of back pay and benefits restored, per worker, per the statute. The town of Fenwick received the civil penalty notice on the same day, and it was not a small number. Ruth took her fee. The class got the rest. Marcus found out at 7:15 in the morning, standing in a pharmacy off Route 9, waiting for Casey's refill. His phone buzzed with a number from Ruth's office, and he stepped to the side of the aisle and read the message twice. He filled the prescription. He stood at the counter and paid for it himself, which was exactly the point. The coverage had been made retroactive, the books were squared, and he paid because he could. He put the inhaler in his jacket pocket, checked it once without thinking, then drove to work,